this week on the It's a Monkey podcast.
The other thing I think companies have to keep an eye on is that the generational expectations are shifting in a dramatic way. And the millennials, they expect all channels to work. They expect to be able to shift channels kind of on demand. And their patience level is so much less. I guess I'm a Gen X, and even I am incredibly impatient. My mom will go and stand in line at a store. I will never stand in a line. And a millennial not only won't stand in line, but if it's not available online, they're not going to buy it.
Good morning, good evening, hello, wherever you are in the world. It is Wednesday, the 5th of April, if you are watching us live on Periscope, and a special hello to you if you're watching us live on Periscope. Friday, the 7th of April, if you are listening in your podcast player or perhaps even on YouTube, we add the podcasts on YouTube, so you can subscribe there or listen to them there. We don't actually add the video quite yet. My name is Kevin Garber. I am the CEO of ManageFlitter and soon to be Manage Social as well, which is very, very close to alpha release. So close we can smell it. As usual, I have some co-hosts with me, also part of Team ManageFlitter. Co-host Kate Frappell, who's design lead at ManageFlitter. Kate, thanks for joining us.
It's good to be back again.
And we're also going to drag in, kicking and screaming, literally kicking and screaming, Josephine Pinto, who is the business operations manager at ManageFlitter. And we're going to have some news items from her as well. Jo, thanks for joining us.
No worries. Glad to be here again.
And later on in the show, had a really, really fantastic interview last week with Michel Feaster. Now, Michel's the CEO of a company called Usermind. Now, Michel worked previously with Ben Horowitz. Now, Ben Horowitz is of Andreessen Horowitz venture capital company fame. Super, super smart guy. He's written the book, A Hard Thing About Hard Things. And Michel actually has investment from Ben in her company. And we chat about all sorts of interesting topics about the centrality of Silicon Valley and why it's important to try build a second Silicon Valley, about the challenge of women in tech, about the enterprise tech space, about how all businesses are trying to become subscription businesses and why that's actually good for business and for the consumers, and a whole lot more. So that's coming up later on in the show, chatting with Michel Feaster. And of course, previously on episode 87 last week, we had a chat with Margaret Heffernan, who is an author, an entrepreneur, has previously had 5 businesses, and amazingly has 2 TED Talks, which are over 2 million views each, and one's nearly 3 million. And we chatted about team building and hiring, and it was really a fantastic chat, particularly if you're an entrepreneur or CEO or are busy building your business. A lot of interesting insights from there. As always, you can email us at podcast@itsamonkey.com. We've been getting some great interviews of people that are suggesting people they want on the show or even offering themselves on the show. So you can always email us or say hi. Let's get straight into the tech news. Always a lot happening in our industry. Interesting this week, there was a bit of a milestone in the Tesla, Elon Musk world. Now, of course, Elon Musk, ex-PayPal, we've spoken about him on this podcast before, and he has multiple businesses, one being Tesla, the electric car company, another one being SpaceX, the reusable rocket company. He's getting involved in another company where you can put electrodes into the brain, which we spoke about on last week's podcast. But interestingly, this week, Tesla, which is one of his companies, the electric car company that is listed, the market capitalization, that's the number of shares times by the share price, which is considered what a company is worth, actually eclipsed that of Ford. Right, so Ford's market cap was about 45 billion, and Tesla notched into the 50 billion for the first time. It's quite a milestone for a couple of reasons, Kate. One is that Ford sold 2.6 million vehicles last year, and Tesla only shipped 76,000 vehicles, but yet the market is deeming that Tesla is more valuable than Ford. Now, this is a very, very interesting thing, right? It's basically saying that the market is viewing that the future of automotive transportation is basically where Tesla is. The market's basically saying, look, Ford is Nokia and Tesla is Apple.
Yep.
Right, and it's saying that, so when Apple first came out and they sold very few phones, then Nokia were like, oh, we're selling 500 million phones a year, we don't have to worry, etc. And eventually Nokia had to try catch up, and of course they lost that, and they don't really exist in the same form anymore. The brand still exists, but I don't think the phone exists in the same successful way. Now, a similar thing is happening with Tesla, where it's turning into this electric car that's filled with software, and it's essentially becoming a big piece of software in a metal casing. So even though the numbers are very different, and Ford sold 2.6 million cars and a tiny 76,000 vehicles, the market's saying that the future, this trajectory, is going to be where it's all at. And also remember, the number of vehicles or the number of devices that are sold are not necessarily linked with the amount of profit. iPhone sells less phones than Android, but it actually makes most of the profit in the industry.
Very true. So Tesla stock is really buoyed by Wall Street's vision of where this is going to go. So similar to Apple, they've sort of backed themselves with all their software, and the potential is why their stock's flying upwards. And Tesla even overtook General Motors a couple of hours ago.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
So they're really rocketing on ahead. And of course, we talk a bit about stock prices on this podcast, and some of them we own. For instance, I own a bit of Facebook, a bit of Twitter, but don't ever construe whatever we say as financial advice.
Right.
No one really knows with the stock market. The future is unbelievably difficult to predict. Now, interestingly, talking about software and even the subscription market, which we will later with Michel, Mark Andreessen, who's the business partner of Ben Horowitz, who Michel worked for, Mark Andreessen has written a fantastic piece called Software is Eating the World. He wrote it a few years ago. It's become a classic piece. If you're listening to this podcast, have a look up Software is Eating the World. And basically his argument is that every single industry is actually becoming a software company, right? You look at transport, Uber, it's a piece of software, right? Travel agents, all the booking online, software. So he argued that every single industry is essentially becoming software, right? And software is eating the world. And now cars and, software is eating the world. I was talking to someone who's in the aviation industry at a dinner the other night. They were saying that, planes essentially fly themselves, and it's just that the airports are not all set up to actually guide the planes on landing and takeoff. And the psychology of people having no pilot is a bit challenging. But even the transport industry is already there itself. And we spoke with a couple of podcasts ago, when we were talking about Internet of Things, we spoke a bit about cars and transportation and how the cars are generating, not an old car, but a new car generates petabytes, which is thousands of terabytes worth of data each year. So new cars are already chock full of software. And I think there's apps that you can tap into your car's software, and you can get bits and pieces of information already.
Yeah, one of our cars at home detects who's driving pretty much, and then loops into that person's phone. If two of you have programmed your phone into the car, it will only detect the drivers.
Interesting. What car is this?
Holden Commodore.
And is it pretty new?
Maybe less than 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's still not that new, but the new cars...
they'd be even better.
They'd be even better, and you can track and monitor, and especially from a mechanical point of view, track and monitor everything. And it's all electrics, and of course Tesla being electric as well. It's most of the cars and the non-electric cars, that it actually spends most of its power moving the engine.
Okay.
And electric cars, the weight is the batteries, but it does actually save. Still, I believe the fact that it is a lot lighter. And in Melbourne, they've actually got a vehicle, like a little golf cart, that runs on compressed air. It's pneumatic. And that's super light because it doesn't have batteries and it doesn't have an engine. It just runs on compressed air. It's quite fantastic. They obviously haven't discovered how to scale that to a car, but it's the cleanest form of energy. Well, you still need a compressor to fill it up with air. So it's still energy down the track, you know.
How much do you know about the Model 3 coming out at the end of this year?
The Tesla, so that's the cheaper Tesla, because I believe, you know, at the moment the Teslas are quite expensive, right?
I think this one enters about 35 grand.
US.
Yep.
So that's whatever, 45 Australian, give or take. Still pretty expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a cheap car. It's not a car for the masses, so to speak. But it's cheaper than the existing Tesla, which I think is post 100,000, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking you.
It's it's a bit of a status symbol in, I know, parts of Sydney and I think in Silicon Valley, because they're incredibly fast, right? 0 to 100 is incredibly fast. As an electric car, it was unprecedented. So Elon Musk definitely likes to push the boundaries. Interesting to see where it happens, what happens. And I don't really like hardware sort of businesses, so I wouldn't buy Tesla. It's just, you know, I mean, they businesses I don't really understand. You know, there's a lot of things like the supply chain and where you get your materials from, and there's a lot of other links that I don't quite understand, and I like to only buy shares of businesses I understand better, which tend to be software businesses, because that's what I'm involved in.
Fair enough.
That's why, although I do have a few Apple shares as well, and that's pretty much also a hardware business, you know. Anyway, that's Tesla. Now, of course, past week was April Fool's Day, and it's become a tradition for a lot of tech companies to publish media releases, I guess. I remember in South Africa on April Fool's Day, they'd publish stories on TV. And I remember two in particular. One was that the police force were replacing all their cars with the latest Porsches. And that was pretty good. And of course, as a young kid, I didn't put one and one together. And the second thing was that they've discovered a tree that produces spaghetti, a spaghetti tree as well. And they, of course, they had footage of all of this, so that they created footage of all of this.
Oh, that's half of it.
Which
it's believable when you see it.
Which is, and especially if you're not aware at the moment that it's April Fool's. Anyway, Joe's going to contribute to this discussion as well. So just as a matter of introduction, if you're just enjoying the Periscope or the podcast, run us through some of the more interesting April Fool's Day initiatives that the tech companies got involved with this year.
Yeah, so Snapchat came out with a filter that is basically mocks the Instagram interface where your picture would usually be. And then at the top, it's got the Instagram sort of white border with the branding, but instead it says Snapchat. And underneath it has like your likes, your hearts, right? And it says liked by your mum and one other. So inferring basically that only your mum likes your stuff on Instagram. Like nobody's on Instagram. So that was Snapchat digging at them.
I think it was because it was to get back at Instagram for taking over taking on their stories.
Yeah, definitely having a poke there. That's probably one of my favourite ones. The second one would be Google Gnome. It's basically a spin-off of Google Home, so a device that sort of connects all the different appliances in your house, but for outdoors. So the Gnome turns your hose on and off and tells you which direction the wind is blowing, and it's quite a sort of cheeky, sarcastic gnome as well. Yes. There's a whole video to go with it.
Yes, I did check out that video. Very funny. Yeah.
Which one did you enjoy?
Actually, I really did enjoy that Snapchat one.
Yeah.
Because it's interactive, right?
Yeah.
But another one that I thought was quite smart was Pet Lexa. So Amazon's just flipped it around with their Alexa Home, which is the competition for Google Home.
I believe so.
Yes. And basically, if you have a pet and a dog, for instance, and it barks, Pet Lexa will translate what your dog is saying.
Oh. I think I watched this one too, and it doesn't the dog barks, and they translate the bark into a command for like a ball to be thrown.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, and then it knocks down a picture frame or something, and then Alexa places an order online to replace the picture frame.
Yes, very smart.
Yes.
Very, very smart. Actually, I really wouldn't mind having a translator for your pet.
That'd be great. My pet's pretty vocal, my dog. She's especially as she's getting older, she grumbles a lot.
So you kind of already understand a little bit what your dog's trying to say to you. So maybe we don't need that.
One day I hope she wakes up and talks to me. She's getting there.
Another one that I thought was interesting was Duolingo had an emoji course.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you teach emojis?
How do you teach emojis? Exactly.
So that was Joe Pinto, who's the business operations manager at ManageFlitter, and Kate Frappell. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back with the interview with Michel Feaster, who's the CEO of Usermind. And we're going to chat about everything relating to building a startup, being a founder, building a business in Silicon Valley versus outside of Silicon Valley, women in tech, what's it like to work with Ben Horowitz, and we'll be back after the short break.
Hi, this is Dave from ManageFlitter. Are you interested in growing your Twitter account with real followers? ManageFlitter's Power Mode feature allows you to search for keywords in tweets and bios. It also allows you to copy your competitors' followers and filter out fake accounts. Go to ManageFlitter.com and sign up for a pro or business plan to start growing your Twitter account today.
You're back with the It's a Monkey podcast. My name is Kevin Garber. I am the CEO of ManageFlitter and the co-host of this podcast that comes to you every week or so. And we are always looking for interesting people with a story to tell in our industry. And it's not often that I can get someone at the end of my Skype line that was responsible or involved with the $1.6 billion acquisition. I'm excited to say I've got Michel Feaster at the end of my line, who's the co-founder and CEO of Usermind, but was also involved in the Opsware acquisition by HP Software for $1.6 billion. Now, Opsware actually just popped into my mind when I was preparing this interview. It was juggling my memory, and I was like, where did I hear that name from? Now, of course, there's a very famous book that all founders or wannabe founders have read called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. If you haven't read it, go and buy it today. It's a fantastic read. And Ben actually talks about when he was involved in Opsware. And I've, at the end of my Skype line, Michel Feaster is someone who was right knee-deep in all of those exciting times. Michel, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Now, CEO of Usermind. Now, we don't talk that much about enterprise style, for lack of a better word, companies. Do you want to give our listeners a very big picture overview of what Usermind does, bearing in mind they tend to be consumer tech people that aren't necessarily up to speed with all the lay of the landscape of enterprise software?
Yeah, sure. I think, what Usermind does is something I think all consumers can relate to. So I think every consumer in the world has had the frustration of, logging into their bank's mobile app, going into a web app, or calling into a call center, and having to kind of constantly repeat, what their problem was or what their challenges were, and not, or even then, going into a store and not having the web, their kind of history follow them around. So Usermind is, yes, we make enterprise software. We describe what we do as a customer engagement hub. But really what we do is we help enterprise companies connect all those disconnected systems so that the users can have a much better end-to-end customer experience. And really kind of what that turns into is, if you're on the web and you're struggling to kind of add a new payee to your bank account, Usermind can detect that and actually get a call center person to reach out and call you proactively. If you've opened a ticket, we can suppress all those annoying email messages so you're not getting spammed with marketing emails while you're struggling with a particular problem. So we think one of the biggest challenges to consumers getting what they want from companies is that those companies have tons and tons of siloed, disparate technology. And so we help connect that so that consumers can have the kinds of experiences that they really crave.
Can you please do that for the medical industry? I am so tired of filling out my details a million times at each sort of little checkup or anything you go to. Just drives me nuts. Yeah,
isn't it crazy? It's interesting. So when I started the company, you never know what verticals are going to pop first. I think that's true for any founder. And what's been interesting to me is the verticals that have moved the fastest for us have been technology companies, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. They tend to be more digital. Financial services, those guys are getting disrupted big time by, young entrants. Millennials really are open to not using big banks. And interestingly enough, kind of manufacturing companies, like people with really complicated supply chains. So I think it'll be interesting to see when it hits the medical field. I'm not sure they're going to be early adopters, but look, we believe our market's huge because we think customer experience is a real core competence of the next 50 years. As every company really is going completely digital, right? And they're able to interface with you and I directly over all the mobile, social, web, all these channels. Increasingly, companies are going to grow or shrink, and win or lose based upon the customer experience they deliver. Because, the competition is one click away, right? It's so cheap to start a software company that I think, if companies don't really win and delight their customers, they're going to go out of business. So, although what we do is a little esoteric, I think it's something probably every person can relate to, and would agree that, like, boy, if a company really could do that effectively, you'd be a customer for life. And that's what our customers are aiming to try and achieve.
And no one ever says, I wish that company gave me less service, right?
Yeah, right. So I have a theory. Benioff, I often say Benioff is the godfather of Usermind. So, Benioff invented SaaS.
He's the CEO of Salesforce. If someone's listening and doesn't know that name, Mark Benioff.
Yeah, sorry, not to give context. So he, when Mark Benioff kind of leaves, Siebel, and he invents Salesforce, he invented a lot of really interesting ideas. So one of his ideas was the cloud, right? The idea that you could not install software on-prem. He was the guy who said no software. So the fact that we all sell SaaS apps now is largely due to his innovation. But, his other innovation was a business model innovation. So he's also really, one of the business leaders who invented the idea of subscription. The idea that we don't pay an upfront license fee for software. We pay this kind of yearly subscription for support and maintenance. And, from my point of view, I actually think people don't talk about subscription enough. And the reason I think that is increasingly, I feel like most companies are becoming relationship businesses, meaning, if you think about a bank, you start that, you open a bank account and you have a relationship with that bank over many, many, many years. And actually, it's funny, I used to travel more abroad than I do now. But, I would go overseas and my credit cards kept getting shut down. And my bank kept trying to tell me you have to call ahead of time and, tell us. And I kept telling them, can't you just flag me as like a high travel profile, right? So I don't have
whitelist you.
Right. Whitelist me so I don't have to deal with that. And what's interesting is I ended up switching banks. Mm-hmm. It sounds very small, but like take that one annoying customer service issue and I moved all of my money, not just my checking account, but my credit cards, my money market accounts to a new bank whom I've been with since, who I don't have that problem with. And so from my point of view, there's a real relationship with the idea of customer experience and customer longevity. And, part of why I referenced the idea of subscription is subscription businesses focus on lifetime value. The theory behind a subscription business is that you make all your money over time with a customer and you want to overinvest up front because if you can retain a customer for another year, 2 years, 3 years, it's actually disproportionately valuable because all the upfront cost is in customer acquisition, right? The marketing, the switching costs. And so my kind of pet theory is that every enterprise, every company, banks, Amazon, right? Look at that with Prime, right? Banks are offering us so many other subscription services. Every business is going to become a subscription business, all about long-term relationships and ongoing purchase. And I think in that world, customer experience becomes incredibly strategic. So sorry if that's a little bit of an aside.
No, that's okay. And as a corollary of that, I would say because every business is a relationship business, every business is also a people business. I think in our industry, in the tech industry, it's so easy to get caught up in cloud and AWS and refactoring and Node versus PHP. But I keep on saying we are a people business, right? We have people that build our product. We have customers. We happen to be enabling everything with technology, but every business is a people business.
Yeah. Well, the other really interesting thing about business is generational shifts. So, I don't know how much, the millennial shift is kind of in discussion if it's top of mind or not. But from my point of view, the millennial generation represents a step function paradigm shift in digital, fluency. I mean, that generation is digital natives, kind of multitasking. They're really able to be omni-channel. So, I have a lot of young engineers in my company who fall into that demographic, and it's really fascinating when you watch them code or work. They just effortlessly move between their IDE and they're on Slack and they're on their mobile phone doing something else. And so, the other thing I think companies have to keep an eye on is that the generational expectations are shifting in a dramatic way. And the millennials, they expect all channels to work. They expect to be able to shift channels kind of on demand. And their patience level is so much less. I think, I guess I'm a Gen X. And, even I am incredibly impatient. My mom will go and stand in line at a store. I will never stand in a line. And a millennial not only won't stand in line, but if it's not available online, they're not going to buy it. And so I think, that's the other really interesting idea, to your point about it's all a people business, is that when your buyers and your customers' expectations shift generationally, companies have to transform to meet that challenge, or that opportunity, if you will.
Michel, let's talk about being a female CEO and co-founder. There's the cliche of the Silicon Valley, go to Stanford, be some flavor of a bro, so to speak, tap into the network and start up something in San Francisco in the Valley. Talk to me about your experience as a female founder that's not from Stanford, not in Silicon Valley. You're obviously having, quite a bit of a level of success. Your list of investors is a real testament. Whilst the investment is only the beginning of it, the class of investor like, Andreessen Horowitz and Charles River Ventures, I believe, as well. I mean, they have excellent track records. So talk through us about how's your path been, both how you got where you are and any unique challenges, I guess, as a female founder that's not from the Valley and not from Stanford.
Yeah, no, that's a great set of questions. I'll try to unpack it. So, maybe a couple minutes on my background, how I got to founding, because I think that speaks a lot to who my investors are. It's all relationship based. So, I dropped out of college. I spent a few years, believe it or not, I spent almost 5 years. I worked in a gas station and then ended up working my way up to running a bunch of those. I got my break in tech in the boom in '98 and went into pre-sales originally. So I was in the field, kind of carrying a bag, helping customers POC and evaluate technology at the time. And I ended up at Mercury Interactive. That was kind of my life-changing company. I stayed there almost 8 years. So I went in that context. I went from pre-sales and I got really lucky there. I ended up working with a lot of big companies, GE and Fidelity, who wanted to partner with Mercury on their larger vision of their company. And so I ended up working really closely with the product organization and joined the product team. And that was kind of the second great break of my life, right? One was probably getting into tech. Two was getting into product, getting out of the field. And kind of finding my passion, the thing I should be doing with my life. I like creating things from nothing, whether that's software or that's teams. And so that was really, a seminal moment in my life. And so Mercury eventually gets acquired by HP. My boss called me and said, hey, you're one of my glass breakers. You're one of my fixers. There's this really broken data center automation business. Do you want to fix it? And so that phone call led to acquiring Opsware. And that's how I met, Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen. And Ben became my boss. So what a blessing, right? He joined HP Software. He became my boss. And in that book that you referenced, which is amazing, he references a management technique he calls Freaky Friday, or he swaps execs. And so he had me take over product in his business. So I worked for him. Can you imagine this? What a life-changing opportunity. I worked for Ben Horowitz, directly managing his old company and leading that integration. And, Ben said to me, why aren't you in a startup? Why are you still at a big company? And so I give him a lot of credit for being the first person to make me think, why am I not doing it? And so when he left HP, I went to my last startup. It was a startup where the CEO was a Mercury guy. And I was there from employee 17 to 500. What a life-changing experience, right? That company just went public. And so, first of all, I would say I'm probably not a typical founder. Not just that I'm a woman, but that I didn't found in my 20s. I spent many years kind of learning from incredible product people, watching people build amazing companies. And if you look at my investors, right? So one, clearly, I didn't know when I, led the Opsware acquisition. I had no idea that Ben and Mark were going to found Andreessen Horowitz. I had no idea they were going to completely reinvent venture capital on some level. And so, when I went to fundraise, when I started the company, by the way, I didn't just have an idea. I interviewed about 350 people to net out the product idea. So, although I was very blessed, to have kind of a sponsor in Ben, if you look at my investors, it's all relationship based. So Charles River Ventures, who you mentioned, they were very close to the Mercury leadership. And in fact, they invested. So Yuval Scarlett used to run product. He was my great mentor before Ben. CRV led their Series B, I think. And so I met CRV through the Mercury team. And in fact, my former CEO of Mercury and the head of products, had breakfast with them and said, we'd put our own money into Michelle's company. You have to meet with her. So I would say, a big factor, I think, in my ability to raise money is, one, a long track record. Mercury was a very successful software company known to have great products. I think the market thought the Opsware acquisition was a good idea. I didn't just lead it; I built that plan. And Apptio, that that's a public company, right? I think I was part of that. So I think a piece of it is investors look at risk, and I have a strong history. And another piece of it is I've built a really great set of relationships with people who went to bat for me to help me get those meetings and to help kind of convince these investors that I would do well, I would do right by them. So I think it's all network for me. That's kind of my story. Now, to bring it back to being a woman, what a blessing to have the mentors I've had. I feel like, people say it all the time, but it's really true. In my experience, anytime you kind of break through a glass ceiling in your career, any big jump, right? Your first manager job, your first director job, your first exec job, your first founding gig, you need people to stick their necks out and say, you're worth taking a risk on. I think, no matter how good your idea is, no matter how much of a demo you do, the people who are investing in you as a person first and foremost. And so I think I've been incredibly blessed to have these incredible mentors, who have opened doors for me at every level. If Yuval hadn't called me and said, hey, do you want to try and fix this data center automation thing, there would be no Opsware acquisition. There'd be no life-changing relationship for me with Ben. And if Ben hadn't said, both go do a startup, Ben told me go found a company. What are you doing? What are you waiting for? Beyond just the money, I think like my mentors have changed my life. They changed my worldview. They kind of made me think I could do things I didn't know I could. So that's kind of my life story. I think, back to being a woman, I think in general, it's harder. It's funny. I read Lean In. Mm-hmm. People ask me sometimes, like, what are the books that blew your mind? Mm-hmm. And, I think Ben's book is pretty incredible. I think Lean In is pretty amazing. When I read that late in my career, by the way, I read that when I was already an exec. I was already deciding to leave Apptio. I don't remember where I was, but just the amount of factual data, behind, the Harvard Business Review study that said, you can mail the same business case to VCs, and if you just make the CEO a woman, the deal is like twice as likely to get funded by a guy as it is if it's a woman. To me, there's a lot of data about the prevalence of kind of unconscious bias. And so I think it's a real thing. I think I was very blessed to have incredibly strong sponsors that helped me navigate that dynamic. By the way, I also think that there's kind of a double whammy, which is if you look at most women founders who get invested in or funded, it's in consumer. So I'm actually a doubly rare animal in that there's really almost no female founders. In enterprise, it's like, boy, it's Diane Green and, it's Paula Long and it's, Meg Whitman, maybe but like, there's not 1,000 of us.
There's Kylie Fiorina as well. She's not a founder, but she led HP, right?
Yep. Yeah. She led HP. She's more of a salesperson than a pure founder, but yeah, I think my network was instrumental. I'd also say, as I've reflected on it, people come and ask me, like, what's the key? And I always tell people, just go found, so I would say it's interesting. And Ben gave me this advice. Ben has always given me such incredible advice. It was harder for me to be an executive, to be honest. I found, one of the things that struck me about Lean In was there's all this research that said as women become more powerful, you become less liked. And as men become more powerful, they're more liked. And, it's amazing. I really found that. I feel like, my least, I wouldn't say successful role, but like the role where I was least loved and least understood, and certainly from my point of view, I have the least relationships was my exec tenure. I feel like I got to a level where I saw that in action. And a part of it was, my own kind of like life stage, emotional maturity. So, I can take ownership for my own part in that. Ben once told me, he said, at one point, you can't work for anybody else. But he also said, Michelle, one of the most important things is that you need to create your own culture. So as a woman, not only am I kind of in an enterprise where there are a few women, but, Mercury was an Israeli company. And I think I learned in my young years a very direct style of leadership, kind of a very no BS style of leadership. And, that served me so much less well. The more senior I got, when I left Mercury, when it was a more, I think, American culture, it just didn't work that well for me. And what's been incredible to me is in founding my company, everyone who works here has chosen to work for me. And the culture is pretty incredible. And so I think women often are in a catch-22. It's why I think founding is something more and more women should just do. I do think you hit a point where it's really difficult to be successful as an exec. I think women can be very successful as managers and directors, but at a certain point, I think the dynamics really work against you. And if you have it in you, I think if you can found, you have to get money, but if you can pull that off, you can build a culture that reflects you. And like it's interesting, my leadership team is half women, and that's unusual. I mean, it wasn't by intention. I think it's some of it is, women are, attracted to the idea of working for women. I think a part of it is that I really value a very diverse team. I think decisions are better when there's a diverse team. But I definitely think being a woman at the highest levels, when you hit being an executive, I don't know that it's as big it's probably a small gap when you're in your earlier stages of your career, but it becomes really, really pronounced. And I think if women hit that point, I would encourage them to just get out and found, because, what's the worst that can happen? You might fail in your startup, but at least you're not failing due to a bunch of social dynamics that make it almost impossible to succeed. So, anyways, hopefully that answered your question or got
your comment about that, women are predominantly or get drawn to consumer tech. One of the things that I was quite impressed with when I've spent a lot of time in New York is in the New York tech scene, there's an incredible diversity of female founders, even including in, very opaque, obscure technologies like the blockchain, for instance.
Yeah.
And very, very encouraged by the diversity of companies that females are founding there. I think if someone's listening to this podcast, I think what's so great about your story is, not to be bound by narratives, dominant narratives. You don't have to be a MBA student from Stanford to go and raise money and do a business, put together a business. Even if you're not in the US, there's no better time to create something, anything. Start aggregating content or, start a job sport, anything. Just, like you, I'm very much encouraging of people to just go and just start something, have a play. And that's when you really, really learn. And that's when you really get to understand yourself. I mean, it's a real journey into yourself. It's a real tool into yourself, being a founder. And what I find is, we're a small team of only 12, 13 people, and we have some incredible women on our team. And what I find so interesting is that they're incredibly loyal, incredibly hardworking, but almost humble to their own detriment. Totally awkward when I give them a pat on the back or try to highlight how good they are at something, and I say to them and that could also be a little bit the Australian culture, which has a humility at its core. So there may be other factors at play there, but they definitely are not totally aware of their own outstanding competence, which sometimes even frustrates me a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that resonates. So two things you said resonate with me personally. So one, startups, I think, are an incredible not just professional journey, but as you said, personal journey. So I would agree with you. I feel like I've learned more about myself in the last 4 years doing Usermind than in the rest of my life put together. And in Ben's book, one of the things he talks about when you're a CEO or a founder is you have to manage your own psychology. And I tell everyone, factually, I do a lot of the same things I've done before in my life. I hire people, I make product decisions, I go work with customers, I sell software. But I'm doing that in an emotional environment that's just so high stakes because there's no safety net. And every decision matters so much more. I remember when I was hiring our first engineer and, I got turned down. And I was just crushed, right? I was so crushed by that. And it was because, number one, it was really personal. Certainly it felt like, gosh, it's my idea and it was rejected. But just the level of emotion, they say the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. And so, I really do believe it's been a journey learning, looking into myself and learning about managing my own psychology. And, 4 years in, I feel like I'm much calmer. I've grown so much, my ability to manage uncertainty, my ability to acknowledge my own fears and not project them outward, right? But to try to rise to the occasion of the leadership opportunity I've been given. So that definitely resonates with me. The second thing you said that I was affected by is, kind of women being humble. I know personally that, I have struggled with fear throughout my whole career. When I left Aptio, you'd think, gosh, Michelle, Ben's telling you you should found a company. I was the head of products at a startup that went, when I joined was $1 million and, I left and it was 80, on its way to IPO. Everyone there would have said I was, an instrumental team member, right? It was a team effort, but I was an instrumental part of that success. And, I literally spent 3 to 4 months, Kevin, talking to people, trying to decide if I was ready to found. And, I talked to probably, 50 to 100 companies, everything from 2 people in a garage with their dog all the way up to GitHub, because I was really excited about what GitHub was doing, kind of the full spectrum, just trying to see what got me excited before I decided what to do next. And, at the end of the day, I kind of netted it out and I'm like, well, there's only 1 or 2 CEOs I'd really want to work for. And so I kind of flipped that question around and I was saying to myself, why?
Which are those CEOs, by the way?
Well, one of them is Paula Long. She's the CEO of Data Gravity. I'm a huge fan. She's just an incredible enterprise software founder. She just really wowed me. And I thought I'd be a good match for her because she came from the engineering side. I thought I could really, add skills. We'd be, I think, a 1 + 1 was 3. And then the other, unfortunately, he was the former CEO of Chef Software here in Seattle, and unfortunately, he's since passed away. He had cancer, which I didn't know at the time. But yeah, I felt like, and from him, he built a huge a huge services company called Avanade, and I was just really inspired by his leadership style, and I thought he could make me a better leader. I could really grow. But I kind of asked myself the question, why is it that if I really can only work for a couple people, why aren't I willing to just do it? And when I sat down and really thought about it, it was that I was afraid. And I didn't have a really good reason why. I had all the skills. I had, so much support. And I do think there's something about that imposter syndrome / just the behavior of putting yourself out there that I think, I think I struggled with it my whole life. And I think many women kind of go through that same thing. And so I don't want to just over rotate on being a woman, but that's definitely something that resonates with me when you say, they're humble. I think women have a hard time accurately assessing our strengths and weaknesses. I think we tend to over rotate to the weakness side and to kind of undervalue our leadership and contribution. And I think there's definitely points in your career when that holds you back because you got to just jump in, right? To your point, just do it. It's scary, or take that job, roll the dice. So I know that for me, it's been a journey. And I tell everybody, when you found, you're going to struggle with fear. And if you're not prepared for that, and how that's going to affect you, I think it's a shock to a lot of founders. I think that's actually one of the thing that Ben's book really exposed. One of the reasons I admire it, even though I knew a lot of the facts already, is his relentless desire to talk about the truth of founding. Founding is we tend to glamorize, Mark Zuckerberg and, successful founders, and it's awesome. But the amount of like struggle and pain and stress and accountability, which doesn't mean anyone shouldn't do it. You should do it. It's worth it. You'll grow, to your point, you're going to grow like crazy. You're going to look back and be like, it's the best thing I ever did. I mean, I think it's one of the best decisions I've made in my life. And I don't want to underestimate and undersell to people that the growth comes through. Ben once told me, for some people, he said, Michelle, maximum discomfort equals maximum growth. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the reason I've grown so much is startups are uncomfortable. I've had to learn on every vector.
When I'm having a tough day, one of the things I do is I go to the quotes from Hard Things About Hard Things, and there's some great ones, where he talks about you always have options, and when they were about a list and they weren't hitting revenue targets and the market was failing, and they had options, and it's simple little things like that. And if I'm having a tough day, something hasn't worked out, we always got options, and on the CEO point as well, I think in so many ways it's an absolute privilege, which I'm sure you will agree. But as Kevin Rose, who's the founder of Dig, he also says, he wouldn't wish being a CEO on his worst enemy. I mean, it's the glamour of it is very minimal, and it is tough. It is really, really, really tough at the best of times. I mean, we bootstrapped. We got a different set of problems. You've got a set of high-profile, brilliant investors. I mean, just people may be interested that Charles River Ventures were one of the first investors in Twitter, even before Twitter was Twitter, and when it was audio and a podcast company. So, and of course, Andreessen Horowitz. And I'm sure the pressure of having such a pedigree of investors brings its own set of pressures as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's look. I think most of us who have worked really hard to be successful, I don't want to let anyone down, and I feel like my investors individually, the board members I have, made a bet on me and on us and on the idea. And, I think they, so the Valley, one of the things I love about Silicon Valley is the comfort with failure. And so, objectively, Kevin, I know that my investors, if Usermind completely failed, in their mind, that was always a possibility.
Do you think they're becoming a little bit too comfortable with failure? There's all this failure porn blog out there, and you've got glamorize. It's almost like overcompensating, glamorizing failure. You haven't made it until you failed at least 3 times. Are we taking a little bit too far?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like on the one hand, now that I'm 4 years in, I could give you a list of mistakes, Kevin, that it's incredible. And I'm sure you have the same story, right? Where, best information you had at the time, best judgment call you could make. And, if you could roll back in time, you would do it differently. And so I think, from my point of view, it's good that we allow for failure, because I feel like, the intersection of like, did you find a big enough market? Did you build a right enough product? And can you monetize? I mean, it's almost like this like perfect storm. The amount of things that have to go right for there to be success, to me, just inherently means no matter how good the team, no matter how good the idea, no matter how much money, it's a really brutally hard thing to make it succeed, because so many things have to succeed all together, right, for the startup to succeed. So on the one hand, I'm really, really appreciative that there's a culture of saying, we get it, it's really hard, it's acceptable to fail. And by the way, I do think there's a flip side of that, which is I know that if I were founding again, the lessons I've learned, it's not the failure, right? It's not the intrinsic outcome.
I think that's a very important point. Yep.
Right? I've learned so much, right? You and I, in founding, have learned so many things that probably, I think so. I think if I did it again, I'd be better at it. I'd make fewer mistakes. And so I think I probably would have a better likelihood of succeeding. But, I don't think it's about failure. I think it's if the failure transforms you, right? Back to your idea about our personal growth journey. If success or failure, if the founder has grown and learned, you probably are going to do better the next time. And so that I really appreciate. I do agree with you that it's funny, Andreessen for a while, they talked about fruit fly experiments. Hey, people are throwing around a ton of money at these consumer ideas that are kind of fruit fly experiments. And I think there are times when there is a little bit of a bubble and people are kind of throwing money at kind of really silly ideas. But overall, I'll tell you, one of the things I really love about technology is I think there's these massive kind of mega shifts in work itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you go back to like the Industrial Revolution was the last mega shift in work. Probably before that was like cities were a mega shift in work. And we're now in the information economy. We're in the middle of this kind of mega shift where people who can create software abstractions are disproportionately valued in the economy. From my point of view, one of the things I really hope is that if we can figure out how to make more innovation happen, and if them spending too much money in the Valley is part of that, man, I hope we can figure out how to create other Silicon Valleys. I'm really convinced that
increase the speed of iteration, right?
Yeah, I'm really convinced that for my children, I don't have children, but like if I had children or my children's children, for the future of every country, we have to figure out how to democratize the white collar work skills, right? How do we? And part of that is like democratizing the money, right?
That's a big question. Wow, that challenge is very bold and important, and we need the likes of Andreessen and Ben dealing with that. And I know Mark Andreessen's very bullish on the blockchain, and the blockchain could be a step in that direction, right?
Yeah. No. So I am part of why I am excited about software in general. Part of why, by the way, I found it in Seattle is like I'm really hopeful there'll be a second valley that will emerge somewhere.
Uh-huh.
So kind of I'm not so bothered by the failure part of Silicon Valley. I think it's largely positive. I get a little bothered when people say things like, well, we don't fund unless you're in the Valley.
Yeah.
And like
try being in Australia.
I can't even imagine, right? I can't even imagine. But think about it. To me, part of the issue is that we don't have a second valley. Mm-hmm. So, I really think Seattle has a possibility to become one. If you look at the valley, how did the Silicon Valley become the valley? Well, there were two nurse trees, right? There was, HP and Silicon Graphics, mm-hmm. and they brought all these amazing people to the valley, and then they all left, and it's all these diasporas of founders, right? So these kind of tech companies become vortexes that bring people in, and then you can see them spit out all these new founders who create a ton of new companies. And Silicon Valley just hit this kind of perfect storm where it's so much talent in the same place and so much money to invest in that talent that you get this incredible innovation economy. And one of my beliefs is that opportunity will be more democratized if we can build a second valley, because I think more harmful than the myth of failure, like in the valley, is the myth that the valley is the only place it can happen. Yeah. When I look at Seattle, so I've been here 6 years now, and I think it's starting to happen here. We have Microsoft and we have Amazon as our nurse trees.
Sure.
We've had a number of really good exits: Zulily, Tableau, Aptio, and there's probably 7 or 8 more. And now you can see this ecosystem of Userminds, right, where there's so many more startups. And so one of my big hopes is that if one more geography, like the minute you can have a second nearly as good valley, you can have 1,000, right? Like you'll never have, it'll be so hard to convince people that it could happen in Australia unless you can at least have a second one in the United States, to me. And I actually think the minute you get a number 2, the fallacy
it's all going to break open.
Yeah. So it's a big part of why and I mean, there's lots of other practical reasons. I think our development pool is awesome here. The quality of life is great. It's cheaper than the Bay. But, to be honest, I really, really hope that we can break that myth here. I hope we're part of that, because I think the minute that happens, so much opportunity, right? If the money can go everywhere, then there's so much opportunity created broadly geographically. You know what I mean? And I think it has cultural implications. I think it has, implications in terms of quality of life. So I feel really strongly about that. I really hope that happens in my lifetime, whether it's Seattle or somewhere else. And, I hope that we're a part of that larger movement because I think that to me, it gives me, creates more meaning to me in terms of like, what is Usermind participating in, right? It's not just building a company.
It's a fantastic point, and you've even got a whole continent of Africa where I'm from originally, where people are so entrepreneurial and so passionate to enable change. Michel, I know time is not on our side. The one request I do have, can you ask Mark Andreessen to start tweeting again, please?
Yeah, I'll definitely mention it next time I see him. He's a pretty incredible tweeter. I'll tell you, that guy, he was the inventor of the tweet storm, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I think he single-handedly did it. Yeah, I think, it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I'm not super active on social media, but, it's something I ponder, because I feel like social media is incredible if you do it right. What an amazing thing that we all got visibility to his thought process, right?
It was just fantastic, and I think there's a lot of people that would really, really love him back. And we learned so much. I've got a list on my Twitter account called Startup Tech, where I put smart VCs and founders, and that sort of I keep that open during my day, and I'm learning the whole time, and I learned so much from him.
Yeah, the challenge, I think, is that for any company or brand, there's a risk too, is if you take a controversial position on social, people can hammer you with it. And I think it's I don't think we figured social media out. I mean, whether it's, the impact of social media on the elections or on fake news, or just the risk people take. I mean, the amount of backlash now that's capable in the social channels.
It'd be vicious.
I think, right? It's vicious. And so, I don't know the answer, but I think it's a shame when, the level of kind of backlash takes away the opportunity for all of us to benefit from, whether it's Mark or Ben or any, I love Aaron Levy. I mean, I don't know if you follow him, but I think,
founder of Box, right?
Yeah, I think he's phenomenal. I mean, I think he's always got a provocative point of view that whether I agree with him or disagree with him, he always tweaks my thought process,
And I think I'm hoping the new generation, the millennials, maybe will have a level of maturity where they realize that an important part of democracy is that engaging debate, and we lose out, exactly as your point. If we get too vicious and we land up chilling speech, boom, we lose out on all those benefits that flow. So if you disagree, just make sure that the debate continues to move forward. Michel, I know you've got a hard stop, so I'm gonna leave it there. I've really loved talking with you. Michel Feaster is the co-founder and CEO of Usermind. We're going to put links to all your bits and pieces on the show notes. I really appreciate your time today. It's been a fascinating story, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. It was very much my pleasure.
The It's a Monkey podcast is brought to you by CheckDog. Use CheckDog to easily review and monitor your website for spelling errors, broken links, and broken images, all with the push of one button. CheckDog can also automatically monitor your website and notify you of newly introduced spelling errors. Go to checkdog.com/podcast to receive 50% off your first month subscription. CheckDog.com, helping the world's leading websites keep their content error-free.
Kate, as I mentioned in the interview with Michel, The Hard Thing About Hard Things is one of my favorite books of all times because it is just raw, and the quotes from that book are fantastic. If you are an entrepreneur or wannabe entrepreneur, read that book and you'll just see how tough it can be sometimes, and the roller coaster of it. So being able to work with Ben Horowitz must have been fantastic. He's a super smart guy. The fact that Michel's got that he's investing in her business is terrific. She's wonderfully smart. Lots of areas of topics and discussions that we could go on for a little while about.
Definitely. Is he the author of this book you're speaking of?
He's the author of the book, and he's the co-founder with Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, very well-known venture capital company in Silicon Valley. Mark Andreessen, of course, invented the modern web browser, Netscape. He was the creator of Netscape.
Cool.
And very, very smart guy, and investor in many businesses, and on the board of Facebook, and a bunch of super smart guys. They have a podcast, their company. They publish interesting blog articles. Mark Andreessen used to be very big on Twitter, and he invented what's called, as we discussed in the interview, the tweet storm. And
you mentioned at the end of the interview that he doesn't use Twitter very much anymore.
He made one statement that was a bit political and controversial that got him into trouble. Right. And then he disappeared from Twitter for a while, saying he's taking a break. And then I see he's deleted all his tweets. And then I think he tweeted saying if people want him to answer a question, they can make a donation to charity. And if he accepts the question, the charity will get the money. If not, the money will get returned, which was interesting as well. And it's a real shame. He used to tweet really interesting insights about everything from leadership to raising money to all sorts of things. And I don't know, maybe he just, some of these high profile people just get hammered on Twitter sometimes. And it's a real shame, really, because a lot of the entrepreneurs, we really loved following his tweets and his tweet storms and getting insight into the minds of smart people. A lot of the time, they've achieved success. Sure, there's a lot of luck in everything, but a lot of the time because they're smart and they're hardworking as well. Interesting as well for Michel that, where you are in life in terms of geography matters, right? Like being in these environments where you can work with smart people that back you matters, Sure, there's smart people all over in the world, but they haven't had the opportunity, and that's why ecosystems evolve that we discussed, I think, even about Berlin. One smart person has success and invests in other smart people, and the cycle continues. I'm sure there's smart people everywhere in Africa, but the ecosystem and the education just hasn't evolved to that point. So, Michel, but life has a bit of the right place and the right time. And if you back that by hardworking and intelligent and giving things a go, amazing things can happen.
Yeah, she does talk quite extensively about the role some of her mentors have played in her success and how they've sort of shaped and coached her, I guess, in founding her own company, which I found that section of the interview interesting. And
interesting. She's a university dropout, like a lot of famous people are, and she worked at service stations, I believe, and landed up managing some of those services, which is fantastic. And I think university is being disrupted as well.
It needs to be.
It needs to be. I mean, it needs to essentially, except for the universities that really get face-to-face delivery well, the rest of them should all be online. Just put it all online.
Bulk, yeah.
It's just a waste of, to have these expensive buildings and expensive lecturers, and it's expensive, right? And that's why if it's all online and you have a set of lectures that gets reused for 3 years or 4 years, cheap as chips.
Yeah, true. I mean, but even then, I don't know that you can just recycle content like that. I think it needs to be consistently updated.
Sure. Depends what it is. I mean, classical Greek philosophy, I'm sure lectures on that will last a lot longer than, design trends or
things. That's true
like,
as well.
It really depends on the subject, and there are a lot of subjects that are fundamentals that calculus and organic chemistry and things that it hasn't changed in not a million, but a long time. Yeah. And universities are expensive, so let's democratize that and give access to people. In the States, people land up, and even in Australia, I've got friends with $20,000, $30,000 debts they have, and.
The only good thing here in Australia is that you can take out a HEX loan. So the government pays it up front and you pay it back once you earn over a certain amount.
Is there interest on that?
A little bit.
Right, but it's not a commercial.
It's not ridiculously. Well, they don't make out that it's ridiculously expensive. I think it's just inflation.
Yeah, which is fair enough. In the States, it can be tricky. So, interesting that, I still think you get a lot of value out of degree. But anyway, great chat with Michel. That's it for episode 88 of the It's a Monkey podcast. We come to you every week. The next 2 weeks, we're actually going to be playing some highlights and repeats of shows because it's Easter in Australia. Easter is a relatively big holiday, and we're going to be down a couple of people. So for the next 2 weeks, we're not going to have a live podcast, but we will still publish a podcast. Please tweet us at Monkey Podcast. Please email us at podcast@itsamonkey.com. We love to hear from you. We hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks for listening to us.
See you later.